Hello, John. Did you ever imagine that maybe you were created for this show? Not by a god, but as an angel, created with my own hands, for the purpose of entertainment. Welcome back to Final Take. I'm Jas. Now Wallace.
I'm John.
And we're back. We're here to talk about Blade Runner 2049 and Blade Runner 2022 and Blade Runner 2036 and Blade Runner 2048. So basically we're covering today the 2049 movie and the 3 prequel short films that came out online before the release of the film. So how are you?
I'm fine, man. Just getting some notes, getting ready for this podcast stream service.
Stream.
I've been fine, man. Just taking it easy, kind of catching up with some movies. But definitely we'll emphasize on this great film. And I think this is our second viewing of the movie. And it feels like it answered a lot of the questions we had when we first saw it. And looking forward to see how we both are on the same page with 2049.
Do you think maybe the first time you were watching it, you were asking the wrong questions?
Yes. I was like Louis in Vampire.
So yeah, we actually went. This was a nice treat because John and I were able to see this in the theater together for the first time when it came out in October, which was really nice because we've talked for endless hours about Blade Runner, but never actually saw one of the first ones. You having a seizure? Oh no, John. Hey, when I was doing the Wallace impression about being created by God for this purpose, you didn't have to start reaching out to God to try and see if He was there. It was a joke. It was a role. You didn't get that?
Oh, maybe it was programming to me to like.
You're right. I did it. But and I also programmed it so that I could fuck with you afterwards.
Exactly.
See, I'm a malicious mofo.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, it was a treat to be able to watch this with John and my mother. She's a big Blade Runner fan too. The first time, I don't know, man. It hit all the right notes. I can start it off like that. I don't think anybody here is going to be surprised by that. Well, I guess they would if they knew the way that I view most movies. But anyways, yeah, I remember us walking out of the theater, and it's like I kind of told John before the episode today that I might have the same. Excuse me, I've had a cold, by the way. I might have the same way of talking about it on the show that I did after we finished seeing it, which is like I don't know how much to say about it. It's like I like it. It's good.
All right, see you next week.
All right, guys. Good night. Anyways, yeah.
Now we gotta peel the layers of this film. I mean, we have to take the dirt.
You're saying we gotta peel the layers off this onion?
Exactly.
But I just said it doesn't stink.
Well,
onions stink.
All right, fair enough. You got me there.
Hey. Obviously, I programmed you wrong because you were supposed to laugh at that joke.
Oh, but you see, maybe I'm
Damn
not
it, John, you
a replica.
Failed me. And now I must have you retired.
You gotta go with the omnibus score.
I still kind of like it though.
It's awesome, man. I actually got the album for it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, great, man. Like, I think it's kind of like on par with how I feel about the Drive soundtrack, where it gets kind of intense and sometimes harrowing.
Hmm.
And well, it's obviously Hans Zimmer, so I mean, that guy is a legend.
It
It's a little
was
bit more aggressive than Jealous one, I would say.
oh, it's definitely more
What I
aggressive.
mean? Definitely more aggressive,
One
but
of the things
it's
that I will say is that I wish it did kind of tap into the recurring like tunes a couple times in the movie. It only does it
mhm.
twice that I can remember,
Yeah.
and I think there was a part somewhere in the first act that they were just flying through the city. And I
Mhm.
was thinking, man, it would have been cool if they would have had just something from the original just to accompany that.
Yeah, of course.
You know, nothing too heavy, nothing direct, but just something influenced. But anyways, it's still a great score. I mean, I guess
Mhm.
we're starting at the score.
Well, we can start. Why don't we start from the prequels? The
Oh
Blade Runner
yeah.
Blackout 2022 by Shinichiro Watanabe of Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo fame. Um, Pretty much when you go into 2022, kind of like 3 years after the events of the first film, pretty much you could tell that there's been a rebellion. I mean, the replicants are trying to make a stance, and this one pretty much sets the table to you know to where it leads up to Wallace arising from the ashes and
Well, Wallace is
going.
not in the picture yet.
No, he's not. This
Right.
is the one with Terra. But I'm saying like this leads to where I mean he can ascend
Yeah.
from later on in the story or in the timeline.
Yeah. The basic
Um,
gist of the story is these two replicants, Nexus Sevens, get together to with some help to destroy all the backup data that we have and to destroy our power grid to just set humanity back into the Stone Ages. And that's the basic gist of it. And then also this, the director, what is it, Watanabe? Is that what he said?
Shinichiro Watanabe, yes.
He's excellent at directing action and getting like a nice emotional value out of the characters for the stuff that he does. Even when he does something more comedic or something more sci-fi or whatever, he always manages to draw something out that's really nice to look at. And in the short amount of time that this film takes place, he really does manage to do that with some great
Yeah,
action.
yeah, of course. I think that was one thing that was interesting, and you made this observation before I did, was that when the lead replicant is talking to his to the girl replicant, and they essentially they get to a point where they're like, where what happens if we die, and essentially what he says is that's pretty much it. It's the first time you start seeing the replicants are self-aware with the idea that this life is the only thing they have,
Hmm.
and that's why they value it so much, to the point where they're willing to go into all these extreme drastic measures in order to protect it
And to
and protect their
extend it.
kind.
Hmm.
So, which is interesting, because you would think that most people going into harm's way will always try to have something in the back burner, where it's like maybe there is an afterlife, and there is that reassurance, at least in their minds, that there could be something else after you die. The fact that these replicants go into it knowing full well that this is it, it's kind of interesting.
Well,
I
yeah, the
mean,
girl
it's
asked
interesting
him.
concept to explore. Yeah,
Yeah, the girl asked him. She's like, and after this, is it heaven? And he's like, no, this world is all we got. And it's
yeah,
but see, by that same token though, when she gets shot in the back while she's doing that flip, she sees the white dove.
mhm.
So is it that they do have a soul? It's just that some of them are choosing not to believe that they have a soul, or is it that I mean, what is if they don't have a soul? What is the symbolism of that recurring dove?
Well, I mean, this could probably. I think this might get a little bit off track, but kind of like the. I mean, it goes back to the one of the main themes in the actual in Blade Runner 2049. It's like, it's does you need to be human to have in order to have a soul? And
Right.
what is ultimately the soul? Is it something more, like it's actually more literal, that you actually possess some sort of like entity inside you that you know goes beyond your physical existence, or if it's something more figuratively, something that comes from what the core of your persona or the core of your values or whatever, and that becomes the soul. So, I mean, as far as the dove coming up, it's actually a motif set up from the franchise. I mean, obviously with Roy Batty's death, that kind of like letting go of the dove or whatever. So maybe that's kind of like going back to that. That it's almost like a poetic representation of Replicant's death and getting
Isn't
them some sort of spiritual or some sort of spiritual culmination.
but I mean, even taking away the spirituality of it, isn't the symbolism of like releasing a dove supposed to be like a sign of peace?
It traditionally it is, yes.
So it could just be that. It could just be that in death they find peace.
That could be the case too.
You know?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that's also kind of like what it alludes to. Plus,
Yeah.
it's just a very powerful image that you know, concurring once again with the franchise
Right.
is that there is always that level of ambiguity in which it resides,
Which makes it great. Yeah.
which is great. So yeah, that was a pretty good short. Big fan of Watanabe.
Yeah.
I think he also worked in the Matrix, and
Animatrix.
Animatrix. But he did the one with Trinity, right? That she's like in the train is the guy who's like following her, the detective. I think he directed that episode from
I
the.
haven't seen it in so long.
I know,
Maybe.
which I guess
It looks more his style, so maybe.
yeah, the reason we bring it back because if anybody that's out there that's saw that short or likes Blade Runner, like it hasn't gotten to the Matrix or like the Animatrix is actually one of the better and under kind of appreciated work that was done for that series. And
Oh yeah. Anybody who hasn't seen Animatrix should check it out. I think even if you don't like the Matrix, if you're a sci-fi
mm,
fan, definitely check out Animatrix.
it's definitely excellent.
Yeah.
So then I guess we'll go into the second short, Nexus Dawn 2036. And this is one where Jas makes his appearance as Niger Wallace.
With slightly more hair, slightly more beard, slightly skinnier. Okay, so it's not me. Get it?
I thought your method acting transformed you into Jared Leto.
That's right. It's a secret. You gave it away. I get all this plastic surgery, and I don't get out of character till we record the commentary.
You out Daniel Day Lewis. Daniel Day
Yep.
Lewis.
But yeah, so Nexus Dawn is actually the beginning of where Wallace comes into the picture,
Mhm.
which is where replicants have been made illegal. They don't really explain how they got any of the data back. I guess they do a little bit in the movie, but they don't explain anything about how they got the power grid back on. But I guess they managed to do it by 2036, or much sooner than that, because it doesn't seem like society has eaten itself.
Mhm.
And Wallace purchases, I guess it's not really said in the short film, but this is what part of it. He purchases Tyrell Corporation's assets and figures out how to make replicants again, but he makes a 100% obedient replicant. And he goes to talk to a council about, because he's been creating all these sources of food, bioengineered food.
He essentially saved humanity from the famine.
Right. And then now that he's done that, he wants to extend to help humanity with replicants again. But again, he's made a completely obedient replicant this time.
It's a subservient product.
Yeah, and this one will live as
before.
long as whoever, like he says, as long as whatever the person who pays for it wants, or as short as they want, and then he goes through a series of tests which are interesting, where he tells they threaten to like arrest him because what he's doing is highly illegal, and he does a test to show that his replicant is completely loyal, and he tells the replicant to take a piece of glass and break it, and to cut his cheek, and he asks him, does it hurt? And he says yes, and then he's like, now you have to make a decision. And he does this all in front of the console, and the console's freaking out. And he says, you have to make a choice. You choose your life or mine. And the replicant, without flinching, kills himself in front of the people. Now, one of the things that I found really interesting in this is 3, 4 guys that are on the console look horrified. by what's
Mm.
going on. Like they're standing up, they're gasping or whatever. But if you look at the lady, did you see her reaction?
Mm-hmm. She was actually
She looked a
into it.
little, yeah, a little into the whole replicant killing himself in front of her thing. I thought that was kind of like when I saw it again, I was like, what's going on there?
Well,
But this is
it shows perhaps that there was like she probably saw the possibilities of actually having that type of power over a
sure,
workforce or what I mean, a creative being
right,
that's subservient.
yeah. And this would mark the beginning of Wallace's corporation, where he's basically Tyrell 2.0 in
Mm.
some ways.
Let me ask you something. What do you feel about Jared Leto's performance as the heavy in this film? If there's a heavy, what I mean, it's very.
Well, we'll get into that when we talk about the movie.
Mhm.
I'll just say right now, I don't think Wallace is the head.
I mean, like I said, I did more like quote unquote because this.
He's a factor, but he's not he's not what you have to worry about. A lot of people disliked his characterization of Wallace. I found it entertaining, and he's honestly not on screen enough for it to ever like really get grating. So it didn't bother me. He's just an eccentric, eccentric super genius or something.
I
Uh,
don't know. I felt that he I felt that he overall how I feel about him as an actor. Like I think he's an okay actor. I've never been a big fan of Jerry Leto. He was great in Dallas Buyers Club. I think that was a phenomenal performance. He deserved all the accolades he got. But for the most part, I like you said before, like I get the respect that at least he's willing to try something different every time he performs. He
mhm.
never tries to keep it within the confines of what he knows. Man, as far as what he did with Wallace, it is true. He kind of bought an eccentric who I think in his own way wants to save humanity. He just has a very kind of like a very like drastic way of seeing the salvation.
Well, and he's
Um,
very, I guess, literal cutthroat.
yeah,
Like he's not gonna fuck around.
exactly. You know what I mean? So, anyways, we'll get more into his performance as we go into the actual motion picture. But
Yeah, this was also,
I
I
get.
think, the shortest of the three prequel shorts.
Will you think it's your favorite one out of the three?
No, I don't know, man. I think Blackout is probably my favorite one.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, and then I guess we'll jump forward to 2048 where Nowhere to Run, and we're introduced to Dave Bautista's character, Sapier.
Yeah.
And in this particular one, you get to see, you could say he's kind of like the first to get the action moving.
Hmm.
And, well, like when we go into the feature film. And, you obviously in this movie, you get to see a replicant that's obviously in hiding and who's very robust and powerful. Yet, what was very distinct about it was that you actually get to see one that's sensitive and that actually has a lot of empathy and compassion. Where you could say, well, the replicas that will be introduced throughout the course of these movies always display some degree of like survival mode, or they're always in a survival type of or they're motivated by survival, but they never really get to show a lot of those layers of like compassion or peace. And it was a really good for even though it's a character that doesn't have a huge screen time, a more pensive, a more of how do you call it, docile um replicant.
Yeah. And I think, first of all, one of the things that I love about the short is more.
The phrase first of all means before anything else.
Okay, I'll have to turn that off. My replicant is speaking to me in the back.
your, your little angel has betrayed
My
you.
angel is speaking. Um, the first thing that I liked about this is more Batista because his role in the feature is so short. It's so unfortunately short that it's cool that we get at least a little more exposure to his character. Excuse me. Um, and I mean the short is pretty straightforward from point A to point B. Now the point that you get to where you see him more subdued, and I think it's because we've always seen replicants that are like on the run, and he's already like that's it. He's gotten to safety. So now all he has to do is blend in, and that's where this short film really like comes into play, where it's like he's forced to these he's kind of taking a liking to this little girl, and he goes to sell some goods to make money for what he's doing in the feature film. And when he comes back out, these guys are harassing her mother, harassing the little girl, and he has to basically use his replicant strength in public to save them. And by doing that, he exposes the fact that he's a replicant. So this literally happens minutes before the feature film starts. But it's great to see Batista, even if it's just for a little more time, because I think he's got a great subtlety as an actor. You would think such a big guy wouldn't know subtlety, but he does it perfectly.
Yeah, it's if anything, it's a showcase to his acting capacity.
Yeah.
Obviously everybody knows him as Drax the Destroyer from the Guardians films, and I personally think he was excellent also in Spectre. It was also like a small role as a henchman, but I think he kind of like he has a presence to him, and he has a pretty decent range. I think he has a good range, and even though once again this was a short role or small role, it was one that actually had a little bit of depth to it, and like it was nice to see a replicant that featured the
Tenderness.
tenderness.
Mhm.
So,
I agree.
what do you think of Ridley Scott's direction in these two shorts? Because he's Ridley Scott's son. He directed the 2036 and 2048.
I didn't know it was the same guy directing both, and I didn't know it was his son. Well, if we're gonna go there, we should mention there's a spiritual short film sequel to uh, to Blade Runner that
Blade
you can
Runner.
find on YouTube called Loom, which was a project he did with Red, the people who make the Red Dragon cameras.
Mm-hmm.
I could totally see it fitting in the Blade Runner universe. It's really good, really worth watching. I think it's somewhere under 20 minutes, and it's free to watch on YouTube. I think if the guy's going to continue to direct the way that he directed Loom and these two, I really want to see him do some feature work because he's got the chops for it.
Yeah, but I think
Sorry.
I know he could probably get the opportunity later on for sure. So, I guess this leads us to the main event, the Blade Runner 2049.
Blade Runner 2049, directed by is it Danny Villeneuve?
It's Danny Villanueva.
Villanueva. That's the Latin guy way of saying it.
That's I'm gonna try my best French here. It's Denis Villeneuve.
Villeneuve, okay.
Yeah, I don't guarantee that's the right pronunciation, but I did my best.
Yeah, we probably slaughtered it. Denny, if you get mad at us, please email us. Please email us. Especially me, I write screenplays. Please email me.
Suck it.
How dare you? Yeah, he's the director of. Holy crap! I'm gonna totally.
Oh well, he has a great list of films.
Yes,
he's
you take it over
been,
because I'm brain farting.
Well, Danny Villeneuve has been on a great role the last about 6 years, I guess, more or less. Prisoners, Sicario, and Arrival was the film he did before Blade Runner. I'm pretty sure that was the one that like got him the job. One of the best. I mean, he's 50 years old. I don't want to say young filmmakers, but a current filmmaker that's working at a very high level.
Mm-hmm.
He has a very unique style to his films. He always aesthetically, high level, delivery. of what I like about it is he doesn't mind getting his hand on the dirt. He doesn't mind the depiction of violence in a very earnest manner. And if you watch Sicario, uh, some of the more you see some of the more harrowing aspects about Blade Runner 2049, you can see where he got it from. You know what I mean? Like that when the part where he where our love, kills the Robin Wright character, the police inspector, or I mean the chief of police.
Mhm.
Like one of my favorite parts of the film is like where she grabs her to like so she can unlock the code with the eye and
Mhm.
just drops her, and that head bump was just like, wow, that
Mhm.
was sick. That David is a very genuine type of filmmaker. He portrays things very honestly, even in a world of like
Science
you know
fiction.
science fiction. Um, Personally, I don't think there would have been there wasn't a better choice for this film from a contemporary filmmaker than him.
I love his visceral nature of doing violence, but I think even if thematically, if you were choosing some, I guess he fits multiple things because there, if you wanted that visceral nature of violence, he can give it to you. If you want a narrative that unfolds at a good pace but that is still complex and intriguing, just based on the arrival, he can deliver. And if you want a guy who has a aesthetic precision and a very high bar that he requires for his films to reach aesthetically, that's also your guy. I think he really he umbrellas a whole lot of what you would need or want from anybody taking over a Blade Runner sequel.
In some ways, it's almost kind of like who really Scott is as a filmmaker. You know what I mean? He's a guy who can go from like Aliens and obviously Blade Runner to doing something like Black Rain,
Mhm.
or White Skull. So it's a director that can provide a visual aesthetic that suits any type of script that he's
Yep.
interested in. So in that ways, I see the parallels between him and Scott.
Mhm.
Also, one thing that was kind of cool about this film is it was the screenplay was by Hampton Fancher, who was also the original screenplay writer for the original Blade Runner. So it was kind of cool that it had the same thread when it came to the writing of the film.
Mhm.
Um, one thing else about the co-writer for the screenplay was Michael Green, who actually wrote Logan.
Yeah, I was looking at his IMDb, and he's got. It's interesting because he's got Logan, which I mean we haven't spoken about yet, but that's a fantastic movie. Blade Runner
Yeah, he actually
29.
got nominated for best adapted screenplay.
That's right.
Yeah,
Blade Runner 2049, which is great as well. But then I see like the first four posters on his IMDb are those two, and then Heroes
he got Sex in the City.
and Green Lantern, and it's like, what is going on there? Like,
Hey man, you gotta get those gifts where you can get them, right?
I mean, I guess so, but
Well, he also wrote. He was part of the writing, the writing team behind Heroes.
yeah, or he did a few episodes. Here,
Oh,
I'll find it.
I can see the link there, man.
Yeah, he did a couple episodes. He did two, no, three
Oh, okay.
episodes. 3 episodes.
Oh, that's cool.
So I guess that's work for hire stuff at the beginning of his career. So makes sense.
Yeah,
He has
makes sense.
Smallville in there too.
Oh, really? Nice. Yeah, so he's delved into the whole fantasy sci-fi realm.
Well, and
So,
the story of Alien Covenant is by him, not the script, but the story.
oh, okay. I like Covenant,
Yeah, I got
but it's a
issues with
different topic for a different day.
it.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So pretty much, this film starts. We'll go to the actual film. Like it starts in 2049, 30 years from the events of the original film. We follow a new Blade Runner. His name's Kay, played by Ryan Gosling. Um, at this point, humans are not in charge of killing replicants. Now it's handled by other replicants. Um, Obviously, like he goes into the I guess the farmlands of the homestead of what Los Angeles is now. And that's where he meets Safety Morton. They have their, he they had their fight where he actually, kills off that character, and then it gives him the clue to like find out like that there's something hidden underneath this tree, and it's the remains of of a person supposedly. Um, he takes it to home base. They start figuring out that there was potentially this was a replicant, and that's pretty much what gets the story going.
Yeah, and then as they start investigating to see if she was murdered or not, they start to find it seems like scalpel cuts. First, some fractures, which were in the pelvic region, which shows that she was probably giving birth. And then they find cuts, as in somebody was doing a C-section, meaning that she was probably dying during childbirth, and then somebody did a C-section. But it was very precise. So it wasn't, and there were no signs of struggle or anything like that. So it wasn't like she was being murdered. So it really does look like she was just having difficulties giving birth.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's where the investigation really starts to get interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, you take over because I'm sketchy.
Then we get a little bit of insight on who Kay is. We find out obviously that he's a replicant and he's been created to hunt down Blade Runners and whatnot. But you start getting to know the guy. Pretty much
Well,
lives
that's where
in
we get an introduction to Joy, because he cashes
exactly.
in his bounty for Batista's death, and so go ahead and introduce Joy.
Yeah. Joy is Kay's girlfriend. She is a simulation and pretty much an app, I guess, for to simplify it. Uh, Joy plays the role of
Holographic app.
as a holographic app. Yeah, essentially, like she plays the role of a significant other that's not real, at least not something tangible. But obviously, Kay and her have built a relationship, or the semblance of what a relationship should be, where he goes home, there's somebody waiting for him. There is the illusion of dinner. There's the illusion of like essentially of a couple, and all the gratifications this comes with it. Um, you could tell that obviously Kay, being a replicant, doesn't have any family or friends, so this is like the one human connection, I guess you could say. Even though it's between a replicant and an app. So, uh, but there is this desire for both of them to have something real. I mean, to
Right.
build together. But obviously, it's disrupted because of their situations, and because ultimately Kay is also constantly on the move as a Blade Runner. So I don't know if there's even the possibility of him getting out of that and trying to build something different for himself is even in the cards for him.
Well, and then also one of the things that we have to point out. I mean, we shouldn't have to we shouldn't do a play-by-play of the whole story, but just give the basic gist about it. One of Joy's functions, first of all, he can't touch her. She's a hologram, so he'll just go right through her. But she's definitely there as a companion. She's the only companion that treats him well, because as you see him walk through the station and deal with his commanding officer, everybody treats replicants like shit. Like, he's got graffiti on his door to his apartment that says "Get out, Skinner." His commanding officer kind of is always talking
There's
down to
always a
him.
sense. There's always a sense that she treats the Robin Wright character. I forgot her name now, but it was a
Yeah.
sense that she kind of like she definitely treats him like a like a slave. What I mean? Like there are some moments where she has some degree of sympathy towards him, but
But
for
they're
the
very
most part,
seldom.
it's very seldom, and even to a degree, even for selfish reasons. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, well, just to push it a little bit further along, there's that scene where she goes into his apartment, and there's almost like that sense of like, there's almost like a flirtation that she's kind of like flirting with him,
Mhm.
and also put in a situation where she's expecting something from him, but he manages to take a backseat to her request. But I found that was even interesting. Like in her mind, even like that she might have some that she sees the necessity of what Kay does.
Mhm.
Um, she's always gonna see him as somebody that's underneath her.
No, not even somebody. It's a thing that serves a purpose.
I think it serves a purpose. Yes.
You know, because and even the other like people when he was walking through the office, people were calling him skin job. They're spitting at him, and even the people who don't insult him, he's like deviating his eyes and he's not making eye contact. So that was one of my notes here. It's like people are needlessly dicks to replicants. Like it's like Jesus Christ, man. They're helping you with your shit. They're lifting. They're doing all your heavy labor. Now they're policing themselves, and you still got to treat them like assholes. Like, come on, chill out at some point.
Well, I think that people don't even. I think that people in general don't see subserving as something they respect, and that comes in all aspects of life. I mean, obviously, this is portrayed with the replicants and how humans treat them, but there is this sense like when I guess I get for most people where something serves a purpose, it's an item, a thing, or it's subservient, they lose track that like in the case of Kay, could potentially have feelings or thoughts,
Mhm.
or is something more than just an item or a product. Um, and I think if I have to get to like like psychoanalytical about it, but I think humans tend to like forget that or put. I think humans tend to like a lot of empathy
Sure,
when it comes to something they feel that is subservient to them.
sure. Well,
You
and
know, I
it's
mean,
also, I mean, I'm sure there's, I mean, this is maybe an oversimplification, but to a degree, it's almost like how people now with their phones, they buy the phone and they love their phone. It's the best phone. It's, oh my God, I love my phone. They're always on their stupid phone. And in 2 years, it's like, this is a piece of shit. I need to get a new one. This is, it's like, so that's it. Like that love fades real quick. Speaking
yeah,
of
it's
love,
it's mhm.
speaking of love,
Nice.
while he's, eh,
You.
while he's looking into this skeleton, he finds out that it's Rachel from the original Blade Runner. So he goes to the old archives to see if he can dig up any information on her that's left, and that's when he comes into contact with the character called Love. And I love the names for these two characters. His hologram is Joy. His antagonist is Love. Make what you will.
Mhm.
I think this girl does a great performance. I think when she needs to like come off as sweet and genuine, she really seems believable. But when she has to be like a maniacal, like I'm just here to freaking like if I have to rip out your spine to get what I need to get, I'm
Yeah,
ripping
when
out
she
your
needs to
spine.
be T1000, which is like what some people actually when I read a review of it, it's like some people felt she was a little too T1000 at times. But I agree with you. I think that the more once seeing this film the second time, I think that there is an array a range that she has
Yeah,
to portray.
there's a bunch of great moments
But
with
it's
that
almost kind of
character.
like the way that I like about her performance is she portrays these arrays, but it's almost kind of like she's still processing these reactions as she enacts them.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And that was kind of fascinating by her character and her
Yeah, like
performance.
there's a great like there's a part where Kay, Ryan Gosling's character, which we haven't talked about yet, but Kay is talking to her for the first time, and she introduces herself as Love, and he's like, "Oh, he named you. It must mean you're important." And she looks at him with this disdain, like, "Go fuck yourself," you know. But then later on, they're going to look for Rachel's memories and stuff like that. And he asks her some personal question, and she like sincerely says, "She's like, it's really nice answering like an honest personal question." So there's like this balance of like it's essentially she's a very sentient attack dog. She's super aware, she's super smart, she can, see the situation for what it is. But again, she's an attack dog. So the minute you snap your fingers, she's going to break somebody's spine. And she manages to go along that wave, and it never seems forced. It never seems like, like she's overdoing it. I think this lady does a great job. And she looks great while she's doing it. Like she fits the role perfectly.
Yeah, I agree.
So go ahead.
So we got into the part where like Kay gets the clues and where he needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then pretty much some of these leads end up kind of like going full circle towards him. And then it opens up the possibility that perhaps he is the center, or he is the one person, the one that he's actually looking for.
And again, to point out why that's important, because I didn't do that before.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel being the skeleton that they found in the box, and the evidence that she was giving birth, means that this could be the first either replicant baby or replicant human hybrid. That's why this is important. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So all these of these investigations lead to him eventually coming up with the conclusion that I'm actually the child of this replicant, which actually compromises his purpose and also puts his life in danger. He's all these leads lead him towards the child of, towards the designer of all these replicants memories, to get confirmation that the memory that he has of his childhood with the horse, and that actually was a real, and that when he supposedly deducts that was actually like authentic, then it kind of changes the course of the film, because now he's the hunted.
Right.
And it opens up the level of like that I am more than just a thing, that I can have a soul, which is kind of like early on in the film, the Robin Wright character told him like, you have to worry about that having a soul. But now it's like there is something realistic that he can attack. There is something that genuine, and so it gives not only does it give obviously the fear that he needs to kind of like conceal himself, but it also gives him the chance to be more than just a replicant.
Right. Which leads him to Deckard.
Wait.
Transition sound effect. So he goes, and his commanding officer basically tells him, she's like, I can guarantee you that you can get out of the building, but after that you're on your own. And he takes off and he goes in search of Deckard. And Deckard, he finds Deckard way out. I forgot where was it, like way out in the middle of like the abandoned.
I think it was Vegas.
Yeah, abandoned Vegas or something like that.
Yeah, abandoned Vegas. Yeah.
And he's living there by himself, except he has a dog that's a companion. And Deckard is none too thrilled to have Kay visiting him, because he doesn't seem too thrilled about having anybody visit him.
Mm-hmm.
So they have their nice fight in a couple nice Las Vegas hotel fancy bars and stuff, which were nice to see visually.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually they kind of just Deckard realizes, I can't beat the crap out of this Nexus 8 replicant.
Mm-hmm.
I barely survived before, so how about we have a drink? And so they start having a drink. And Kay notices that Deckard has a dog, and he's like, is he real? And Deckard's response is the best response ever. As he's holding his drink, he looks at Kay and he looks at the dog, and he's like, why don't you ask him? Like,
a typical Cerberus Harrison Ford delivery.
Right, and also very, very much in line with everything Blade Runner, which is we're never going to tell you anything directly.
Mm-hmm.
We're always going to allude, yeah, it could be a replicant, could be a real dog. I'm not going to tell you, so you guess. And so he starts wanting to ask a whole bunch of questions about Rachel and stuff, which is clearly not something that Deckard is very fond of, even, it seems, of even thinking about. Because he seems to have even, like, I don't even think he says Rachel ever. Maybe the whole movie, but especially not during that scene where he's talking to Kay. Deckard's very hesitant to even talk about her. And in fact, he just snaps back at him at some point. He's like, "You're asking too many damn questions, you know? Like, shut the fuck up, kid." And it turns out, after a short interaction that they have there, that the commanding officer or whatever has found out where Kay is, and now they know where Deckard is. And we start getting into another phase of the plot of the film, which is that Deckard tells Kay the reason why, because he starts trying to find out about Deckard's kid. Turns out it is Deckard's kid, but the reason why Deckard is alone is because part of the plan was he was going to leave before the kid was born so that he would never know anything about the kid, and they couldn't use him if they got to him to get to the kid.
Mm-hmm.
So then they find him at this hotel that he's staying at. And you want to take over? Because I'm starting on.
And pretty much they're being discovered. There's a melee, and then Love shows up. Essentially,
and crushes Joy.
No, she ends up both crushing Joy and kidnapping Deckard. Pretty much leaving Gosling with still the hope that he is the son of Rachel and I guess Deckard at this point. But when he's eventually rescued by the replicant how do you call it, uprising, he ends up learning the truth that he was just a decoy to actually protecting the real daughter of Rachel and Deckard, and that
that's the operative word, is daughter.
Pretty much reaffirming that he has always just been he was always a thing to serve a function.
Yep.
And was just pretty crushing to get your hopes up from believing that you're something special, and you had this untapped possibility that could open new horizons for you or opportunities for you, that just kind of goes to reaffirm that you're just what you always been, designed for a purpose. And now obviously with Joy being out of the picture, then he really doesn't have anything to claim. But at that moment when he sees it, this is where this is where the film's biggest controversy goes as far as what the point of it is. While he goes on the streets, he sees a hologram promoting the Joy app or the Joy holographic app, and he starts realizing that there was always Joy's programming all along to kind of be a model of pleasure or a model of comfort, and that perhaps there wasn't anything profound to his relationship with Joy. It was probably all like just an artifact. A little before that, though, we end up going to Wallace's headquarters, where he has a conversation with Deckard, trying to get the information to where his daughter would be, because Wallace is also trying to, if he could get to know how to have replicants actually give birth, then he would not have to design this many, and B, that just opens an opportunity for him to let that be take its own course, and it changes the way he goes about his industry. He reproduces Rachel, and in one truly crushing moments in the film is that it looks just like Rachel, walks like Rachel, everything like the Deckard. It's almost like for Deckard, it's almost like seeing a ghost. But it's those minor details where it's kind of like, yeah, her eyes were different.
Her eyes were green.
Her eyes were green. Exactly. Where it's kind of like, ultimately she gets killed by Wallace, and I think this is
brutally,
where
just shot in the freaking head.
Yeah, like just
product.
like a product. But I feel that that's kind of like that line delineation there, because it cuts from Harrison Ford's reaction to Gosling walking towards the street and seeing the Joy hologram, and I think that's where those two men are linked, because both of them have fallen. Both of them are linked because they fell in love with something that could or could have not been programmed for them.
Mm-hmm.
And well, it's kind of interesting from that point on, at least for me, like the point of the movie is delivered that ultimately what makes you to have a soul, or what makes you human, whatever that may mean, is the ability to be selfless. Because at that point, what Kay has to offer is like, look, this is not about me anymore. There is something greater. But it's not even about the uprising from the replicants. It's the fact that, look, the decent thing to do as a person is to get this man with his daughter. He sacrificed so much to put in this position of safety that I think he also see the ultimate tribute of being a person is to be selfless, to sacrifice, which leads towards the climactic ending with your girl Love kicking his ass for like about 5 minutes.
And she literally says to him, which I found a little out of place. But actually, before, let me back up real quick, because it was one thing that I found interesting. Just to talk about the ambiguity that they keep pushing in this film, or this franchise. When Deckard is talking to Wallace, Wallace says, "Did you ever consider that you were designed for this purpose? Did you ever consider that you were, you were meant for this purpose? And if you, maybe you were designed," but then he goes, "Maybe you weren't." So it's like, okay, you almost gave away that he could have been a replicant designed for another replicant to have, babies. And then in the end, he's like, or not. So I thought that was something worth pointing out. That was pretty interesting.
Well, it gives note to the biggest mystery to the whole franchise. I mean, I hate saying it franchise because it's 2 movies in. We don't even know if we'll get a third one. But the whole key to the story is that question whether Deckard is a replicant or not.
Right.
I mean, and I personally think the fate that they could potentially keep these movies getting made, who knows, is the fact that question never gets answered.
And I think it never should. I mean, if you want to, there's ways that it already has been answered, sure. But I don't know. It's a better one to have as a question than ever have an answer for,
Exactly.
So Love comes in and she kicks the crap out of Kay for a bit. But the one line that I found interesting that she said when I watched it again is she says, because she beats the crap out of him. And once he looks like he's done, he's not getting up again to keep fighting, she looks at him and she's like, something like, "I knew I was the best."
Yeah, she said something like, "I'm the better one,"
or something like that. And it's like, what is that in reference to? Like, because she was never challenged in any way in regards to that.
It's a little odd. I will admit that I kind of had to think about what was the point of that line or that delivery.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming when I saw it again, but I mean, who cares? It's one line and it still works. And then Kay goes in and Deckard. So at this point, the what do you call them? Flying cars that they were in, this flying limo, has crashed
into the ocean,
into the side of the city, is slowly being dragged into the ocean. Deckard is handcuffed to a chair, so he's almost drowning. Love swims back to the car to get Deckard, and Kay comes in from underneath the water like some freaking shark and kills Love. And he's screaming as he's strangling her at some point, which I love that visceral nature of this guy's direction for violence. It was just to take a side step. One of the things that I loved about the Matrix that I saw later on that they cut out is if you listen to the rehearsals, even when they were shooting it, when Carrie-Anne Moss was shooting that opening sequence. Almost every kick and every punch she throws in that scene, she screams when she throws them, and it's awesome. And they muted them all out for the feature film.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
I don't know why you would do that, because when I was listening to that, when from behind the scenes when they were shooting it, I'm like, dude, she sounds like she's really being aggressive and like kicking these people's ass, and then they just muted all the screams and shit. I don't know why they did that. But anyways, so in the end, Kay does the good thing and he saves Deckard. Except Deckard wanted to die because if he's dead, they stop hunting the daughter because he's the only lead left. Now is where you were at where Kay has made his decision.
Exactly. So Kay pretty much tells him that, like, look, essentially with the with the car sinking into
Flying
the
limo,
ocean,
or whatever. Yeah.
the flying limo, whatever it is, like wherever that sinks, it's like, look,
You're
gonna
basically
get
dead.
you're basically dead. So you don't have to worry about it. You're dead. So we see us towards the end of the film where Kay ends up taking Deckard towards his daughter, who ends up being the designer of all the replicants' dreams.
Memories.
And she's obviously kind of like in a boy in a bubble type of deal where like has so many her immune system is so in chatters that she has to live within this bubble, confined within this bubble for the rest of her life. So she finds comfort and purpose creating the memories and dreams for these replicants. And ultimately we find out that that was ultimately the Decker's and Rachel's daughter. And there is this moment where like Harrison Ford questions Kay, like, why do you do this? What was the point of going out? What am I to you?
Mhm.
And Decker doesn't. Kay doesn't respond, but he leads the way. He says, "Go see your daughter, and I'll be fine." Um, but uh, Love wounded Kay pretty much fatally because
Mhm.
she just pretty much stabbed into it. So he's essentially like he's essentially dying at that point. Then we start seeing the I guess in this movie, the symbolism of his redemption, of his humanity, was snowflakes. Um, where like in the original Blade Runner, is Roy Batty's iconic dove release. In this film, there's twice in this movie in which um Kay gets hit by snow. The first time, and just to go back a little bit, when he gets out of the lab after talking to Decker's daughter, when he starts where the snow hits him, and it's almost kind of like the reflection. The meaning behind it is like is the first time he kind of feels like he's more than just a replicant. That he is human. That he has something tangible in his existence. What I like about the second time when it appears is that it really symbolizes him. That's ultimately the idea of being human goes beyond where you're a replicant or your flesh and blood. It's the fact that you could have empathy and you could have a selflessness towards others. And I think that's the ultimate, it's the ultimate definition of being a human being is that you can love and you can actually have a self will to do the right thing. So when it hits him at the end, when the snow falls on him, it's kind of like his completion. Like, he is he does find something meaningful and deeper than just being a function.
Mhm.
So, unfortunately, uh, Case succumbs to his wounds. And then with the last image of the films, you get to see Deckard meeting his daughter through the plexiglass. And he obviously can't touch her or feel her, but it's this great reaction at the end of the film. And actually, we'll have to go into Harrison Ford's performance, but it's like kind of like a very relieved and kind of like a sullen smile that he gives at the end while his hand reaches the glass, which ends the film.
Mhm. That was
And
a great way to end it. Yeah.
yeah, that's a great way to end it. So it's I think it's a great film. I find it to be extremely moving, and you wouldn't think a movie in which like you know people are getting shot left and right or
Right.
stabbed or it's a detective story with there's also a great detective story, by the way. Actually, at its core, it's a very human film, kind of like the first Blade Runner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a it's a it's a worthy sequel
Yes.
to a masterpiece,
Yeah.
and I think it's a masterpiece is its own right. I don't know if it's superior. I don't think it's a superior film, but damn, it's close.
Yeah. It's definitely a great movie. as far as superior or not, I just choose not to even see it that way. Like one's its own thing, the other one's its own thing.
I think. Well, one thing that we brought the original when we talked about the last streaming that we talked about the original Blade Runner is that the one thing this script had to maneuver is all the different versions the original Blade Runner has, because they all kind of incorporate into the story.
Right.
I mean, the whole idea of Deckard being a replica. And if you watch the theatrical release, that's never even hinted at.
No.
You know, I mean, it's later on when like Ridley Scott did his, his final cut, or even before that, his cut before that. Like, that's when you start seeing the hints of well, maybe he is a replica, maybe he isn't. Obviously, some of the footage that has been leaked, some of the overall fanfare that has built throughout 30 years, that the script was very conscious of, and was able to kind of like I guess add that into the fabric of the story.
Well, especially in the Electric Unicorn cut, one of the most important things that you could see in that cut, if you can get your hands on it, is the scene after the credits where you actually get to see Deckard and Rachel in the spinner as they're driving through the woods. And they have this short conversation that basically says, I think Rachel even literally says, I think we were made for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the direct thing that leads to Blade Runner 2049. You know, like if there was any one piece of that movie that led to that sequel, it's that moment, because that's the moment where you realize they're basically, if he's a replicant, they're the Adam and Eves of replicants. And if he's not a replicant, then she was definitely designed for him. So, a few of the things about the ending I not had issues with, but one of the things is Wallace is still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is Deckard's daughter still works for Wallace, meaning he knows where she is. He doesn't know who she is. But if they can find Deckard in any way, they're gonna find out who she is.
They're gonna link it, yeah, exactly.
So this is probably where Ridley Scott says he has an idea for the third film, is because how we were talking before, how Wallace wasn't the villain in this. I don't think Wallace was the villain in this. I think Wallace was a guiding force for it, but I think Love was definitely the antagonist.
Okay.
You know, which again, that name just makes so many other points ironic.
My angel.
And now, one of my biggest gripes about this film, and I don't ever hear anybody talk about it, what the hell happens to Deckard's dog? They left the dog in the middle of freaking abandoned Los Angeles.
Well, it's gonna get its own movie.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's gonna be directed by J.J. Abrams.
Is it the sci-fi version of
Rian Johnson's gonna do a movie about the dog, and it's just gonna.
It's gonna be the sci-fi version of Air Bud, but it's gonna be called like Air Deck.
Exactly. Air Deck.
And like he's gonna wear a little jacket that is kind of inspired by the spinner design.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, if that's how it works out, then I'm fine. I'm happy then. But anyways, yeah, and then we should briefly discuss Ryan Gosling's performance and Harrison Ford's performance. I think Harrison Ford has a few tender moments that are really nice. There's a little bit in me that kind of, he almost seems a little confused as to how far to go or how much to pull back at some points. But I think his performance is really solid. I think Ryan Gosling, kicks ass. I really like the guy, man. For one of these guys to start off like a heartthrob, I think he hits all the notes you have to hit in this movie. And it's not like he has one note where he has to be the detective. No. There's the moment where he finds out he's not the chosen one, as it were. There's the moment he finds out his memories are not his own, and he reacts very viscerally. When he does action scenes, he gets really into it, and he's really aggressive about it. I think both of the performances are really, really solid.
Well, let's go back to Harrison Ford as Deckard. I think that, and we've talked about this before, like, between his iconic roles like Han Solo or Indiana Jones, there's not like a lot of varying degrees
right
to what he brings to the table with those particular characters. He's always kind of like the, very arrogant, but yet kind type of anti-hero.
Mhm.
It has sort of like a wry sense of humor, but you know what I mean, it had, but you know,
A
his,
little crotchety.
yeah, his frailty comes through the cracks, you know. But I think what I liked about Decker was that it's it is kind of cool seeing the in course of two movies that what he does, there's a little bit more of a burned out effect to him.
Hmm.
That you know, you know, if you compare all the three iconic characters that he's played, Decker's a little bit more worldly, a little bit more haggard,
Hmm.
perhaps a little bit more cynical. And as you see him portray him as an older person in this film, I like the fact that it was kind of like what you said. It's like it seems like he's been so distant to everything else that the events have happened 3 4 years ago. He's just kind of like a, to be honest, if Kate would have never showed up, he would have just been
Yeah, he would stay in
an
the
old
desert.
drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would have stayed in the desert. You know, what I mean, like almost like a forgotten relic in his own right.
Yeah.
Um, but there are three moments in his performance that I think were great. Like when he delivers the line to Gosling, like sometimes to love somebody, you just have to be a total stranger.
Mhm.
You know, when he turns his back and he hears Rachel getting shot by Wallace, I think, or
No, by
Joy,
love.
and it's kind of like what I liked about that particular moment was that like he kind of like denies that moment, that the happiness he could rekindle because he knows it's not authentic, albeit that it was probably never. It could there's a chance that it wasn't authentic to begin with.
Hmm.
And then the final scene where he like kind of like touches the glass and he has that kind of like smile, like there is that joy and relief, but also kind of like that. Just there's something very melancholic
Hmm.
what he brings to the table, and I thought that was pretty nice. You know, I mean, it shows some range to him. As far as Gosling as Kay, I agree with you. The guy's a fantastic actor. One thing I kind of like talking to my friend one time. I said like he's the thinking man's heartthrob. You know what I mean? Like he could easily been doing Justice League or Marvel films because he has the talent, the looks. You know, he
Hmm.
has everything going for him to be even a bigger star than what he is. I mean, he is a big star, so. But I always respect the fact that he wanted to make more artistically creative choices,
Hmm.
and I also think that, and we discussed this too, that the one thing that distincts Ryan Gosling from other young leading men is that he is not afraid to be vulnerable, and he's not afraid for his leads to lose and to fail. And
Right.
like if you really see the tracks between Drive, La La Land, or Blade Runner 2049, like these characters don't have great outcomes. You know what I mean? And they're all driven by loving something,
Hmm.
loving somebody. In this case, he loves Joy. You know what I mean? That's pretty much the how everything goes expands from that character. And what was interesting is that everything has to be internalized with K. You know what I mean? Like he has the one outburst like when he like when he gets the
When he
revelation that
finds
he
out
could
the
be when he
memories.
like yeah exactly when he like burst into like anger and confusion, but for the most part it's something he has to play close to the vest. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I can't think of. I mean, maybe Tom Hardy or somebody like that that displays that type of vulnerability. That Gosling does as a performer.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, man. I liked his work in this. I was glad when I heard he was casting it. I was pretty happy about it. I don't really have any misgivings about the casting in this. I think everybody they chose the appropriate cast for it.
I think it's got the appropriate people working in this film.
Yeah.
The best director they could have gotten for this film
Yeah.
got hired, and the best lead for it got hired.
Hmm.
So they really nailed it. Um, so what do you think of its? Well, it got we're gonna talk a little bit of its accolades. It got nominated, if I'm gonna say, for 5 Oscars. Most of them are technical. Obviously, the cinematography, which is one of like the elements of the film that got praised by Roger Deakins. Of Do you think that this is a type of movie that is easily for like people who nominate awards or whatever, it's easy to just dismiss. It's like it's a technical marvel, but there's nothing in the story that's worthy of being rewarded or being kind of like nominated for any prizes.
No, I think it's a great script. If you want to say, like Ridley Scott says, that he thinks it's a little too long, fine, go ahead and say it. But I still, I don't really see many. Unless you're talking about transitional scenes, I don't really see many scenes in that movie that you can cut out and not miss it for whatever detail. So I think it's a great script, and I think the performances are good too, and the direction and the cinematography. It's not just technical things that this movie does right. It does a lot of other aesthetical things, correctly too, like writing, performing, editing, etc. I don't like the idea that this has to get stuck in this. It's only good for its technical achievements. No, because this thing has a really good story at its core.
I think that it's like it's almost kind of like what happened to the first Blade Runner. I think that this is a film that it's already appreciated. I feel like it's appreciated by its base.
Yeah.
But I can see this movie also having like a cult following of its own.
Well, they already say there's a 4-hour cut floating around somewhere, so I gotta start doing my searching to see if I can find something.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that shoot, sorry, got a leg cramp. Do you think that because we talked about this in another stream where like the original Blade Runner was a box office bomb at the time. This film was a box office bomb.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the expectations for the sequel were higher in terms of its profitability? It seems that or do you think that there was a knowing decision having? Do you think one of the cases where Warner Bros. Was like, look, it could be productive, but let's actually back up an actual artwork. You know what I mean? And not just think about it in terms of like whether this will spawn another temple or not.
I honestly don't know, man. I want to go down the route that these people need to freaking figure out how to manage their expectations already. I mean, I didn't look and see how much money it made in the box office, but I mean, how much did it, like, because they start calling it a bomb, and it's like, okay, well, how much did it make versus, like, okay, here in the U.S. it made 92 million. Opening weekend it made 37 out of a $150 million budget. If you can't project for these numbers, or don't freaking budget those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It's but I feel like it's maybe not in this case necessarily, but I think most of the time when they say they have a flop or whatever, it's because their expectations are like, okay, well, we spent $100 million to make this movie, and it has to make $250 million opening weekend. What is that? And then they only give it 3 days, and no China opening. So it has to make $250 million in the U.S. over the course of 3 days. That's not a way to manage your expectations, So I don't know.
Well, I guess the reason I bring this up is because if the idea, and I could be wrong, if the idea behind it was to obviously part of the reason was because it's it's a film, a classic film that's grown throughout the years. And I think that you look back and you say, well, let's give it a chance. Maybe you could build a temple out of it, right? But if that's the idea, they actually went about it in like because when I talk to younger people, like they hadn't even seen the original and actually saw the sequel, they all agree they think it's a good film or whatever, but they do find it to be very long. So it almost went against the grain in terms of trying to captivate a new audience.
Well, why? Because it doesn't have a cut every 200 milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are these editors, like, I think Michael Bay may have been one of the ones who started this whole idea of like, it has to, every action scene, it can't be like cut, 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 cut. No, it has to be cut, 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 cut. You cut in, you punch in, you pull up, pull in. Here's a punch. Here's a way. You can never tell where the hell anything is going on. Yeah. But there's so much visual information that these kids don't get bored, I guess, now. And it's like, people have to understand there's some movies that are fine like that. But then there are times that you pull back and that that you can have a slower paced film and slower paced editing in particular. By the way, we're at an hour and 15.
Okay.
So,
So
anyways,
any any final thoughts to Blade Runner 2049?
no, man, I thought it was great. I think if you haven't seen it, you gotta check it out. I mean, if you hated Blade Runner, I'd still say check it out because I mean, it's if you hated it because you saw it recently and you just couldn't get into the 1982 future aesthetic of it, fine. But maybe this will do it for you. You know, I think it's a great movie. It's visually astonishing, and it's a great story. Um, as far as
I
any
think
deleted stuff or anything like that, I can't speak to any of that yet. We'll probably have a future episode in like 5 years where I'm like, oh my god, look at all this stuff.
for me, like one thing that one of the things that's interesting about both films is that it kind of feels like now going to 2018 and seeing kind of like the environmental decays that we'll be facing, that the possibility of having our world to look aesthetically somewhat comparable to the world that's been depicted in the Blade Runner movies seems a lot more realistic, and it's very terrifying. You know what I mean? Like they actually, it feels like it is conceivable for kind of like a decaying, you know, to live within a decaying metropolis that's
Sure.
just by its, by it's hanging by its strings. And the idea of now we see it obviously more and more, the idea of like robotics or something mechanical as the next, you know, taking that next step in its evolution. I'm like I said, I don't know if the whole idea of a soul, whatever, but the idea that something that we are creating a sort of like I guess a surrogate for ourselves. It's also interesting because what happens if, I mean, they end up taking the social responsibilities of what we used to do.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And that is another thing that's also intriguing, and it's kind of great that like obviously the nexus of all this was Philip K. Dick's story is that
Nexus.
He had the you
Yeah.
that he had the foresight to see that this is kind of like where we're heading.
Yeah.
But and besides that, like it's one of it's one of the great films of 2017 that actually was a very solid year for films.
Yeah.
And it was kind of good to see a sequel that can stand out on its own, and it doesn't lead to like, oh, we need to wait for 3 or 4 movies down the line. You know, I mean, it's its own film, and they did a fantastic job, and I'm very happy to own this film.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good one. Now, one more thing before we go. People are saying this is the best sequel ever.
Well, I reserved that. I reserved that for Godfather 2 and Aliens. Actually, I wrote down a list of these films the other day. I got Godfather 2 as 1, Aliens as 2. I had The Dark Knight was 4th. I had Blade Runner 5th. Now, why do I have a third? It'll come to me. The third one I had, the third best sequel of
Terminator
all time.
2.
You know what? Was it Terminator 2? I'm pretty sure it has to be up there.
That's
I mean,
that's one of the ones I was like. The minute somebody says best sequel, I'm like Terminator 2, and then I start remembering Aliens and stuff exists, but immediately it's Terminator 2.
Yeah, Terminator 2 is pretty awesome, man.
Yeah.
But definitely it's in the conversation.
Yeah. So don't forget, guys, check out Loom on YouTube. It's by the director of the second and third short film, Ridley Scott's son. Definitely worth watching. I figured I should mention it a second time because it might get lost in there. But thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell all your friends and your family and print it on cards and pass it out on the streets and annoy people. And yeah, you don't have to do all that. But thanks for joining us. Thanks, John, for your thoughtful discussion on Blade Runner. I appreciate it as always.
All right, man. So I guess we'll see you at the movies.
I should have had a Wallace outro.
Wow.
There you go. Good night, guys.
All right, peace, man.